Hello and welcome to this session of the Freestyle Wellness Festival, where we're going to take a look at a subject that is top of the list for so many people living with diabetes: diet and exercise. I'm Stephen Dixon. You may recognise me from Sky News. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a teenager. Now, I can't wait to find out more from our experts. We're going to get answers to some of the most commonly asked questions from the diabetes community. I've got plenty of my own as well. But first, if you want some inspiration, a great example of how diabetes doesn't have to hold you back, then look no further than Chris Pennell. He's a rugby player at the very top of his profession, playing for Premiership team Worcester Warriors. Now, we've asked him to keep a video diary to show how he manages his extraordinary diet and fitness regime whilst living with type 1. Let's have a look.
Good morning, it's 6:45, it's Tuesday morning. I've had a little visitor this morning, which was lovely to have a cuddle in bed. So first thing I've done this morning is I checked my glucose levels, and pleased to say had a nice smooth night. Showered and dressed. Next job now, we're going to get downstairs. I'm going to have a coffee, take my background insulin, and then I'll be off fairly shortly to rugby training. And this one, you're on half term, aren't you? So you don't need to worry about schoolwork this week. No, good stuff. Right, catch you later on. Cheers. Hi guys, that's me. Just arrived at the rugby club, ready for training today. It's a pretty light morning. We've just got meetings, game review from the weekend. I've got some weights to do and some skills, so it's not going to be too taxing on my body this morning. I've had my coffee on the way in. I've got my bits and pieces with me, my insulin, my reader, my glucose tabs for if and when I need them. I've had no breakfast. I don't usually have breakfast on training days, and the reason being is that I just find it a bit easier to manage my glucose levels without any fast-acting insulin in my system. The other thing is it encourages my body to start burning fat, which is, as someone who's on a low-carb, high-fat diet, that is my primary energy source. So just giving it a bit of a kickstart in the mornings to get it burning, I find really helps and gives me all the energy I need to get through my training. So I will see you guys later on. I'll show you what I'm going to have for my first meal of the day after I finish my weights and my skills. I'll catch you then. Hello again everyone, it's 11:15, just after I have recently finished my weight session. I've got a bit of time now to get some food on board. This would be my first meal of the day. My sugar levels, I'll just take a quick scan now so you guys can have a look. So I've been nice and flat throughout the day. I did creep up a little bit towards the end of my weights, so I've adjusted for that, just taking a couple of units of my fast acting, which will help to nudge me back down again, but will also help me with my my food now. So I'm just going to spin you around and talk you through very quickly what we've got. So this morning, the chef has very kindly prepared me a nice chicken and halloumi salad. I've got some olives on there as well. There's some extra virgin olive oil for my fat. I've also got, which I'll have probably in about half an hour to an hour or so after this one, just before our next meeting, I've got a high-fat protein shake, which is just a normal sort of low-carb whey protein, no sugar almond milk, some peanut butter and some coconut oil, all mixed together. And then that will see me through for the rest of the afternoon. This afternoon we've got a couple more meetings, and then we're on to our pitch session, which is where things can get interesting with my blood glucose, tend to nudge up a little bit during those sessions. So we'll see where we're at and we'll deal with it then, and catch you guys shortly. Cheers. Afternoon everyone, it is now 3:15. That's me just pulled up on the drive at home, so nice short and sharp day today. Rugby session was really good this afternoon. I'm being made to look a lot better than I normally am with my glucose management. I'll just give you a quick scan just to show you. I've been nice and flat throughout the rugby session, which doesn't normally happen. Usually in rugby sessions I'll spike up, and I'll show you some of my charts later on. This is really highlighted on game days when adrenaline is flowing, etc. So I'm being made to look pretty good. Not always the case. I think the reason it stayed nice and flat is probably I had a couple of units of my fast-acting insulin with that, with the snack, with the chicken salad and the protein shake. So post-training, post-rugby this afternoon, I've had another protein shake, a smaller portion this time, with another unit of fast-acting insulin just to help process some of the carbs that are in that. It was a low-carb shake, but because of the amount of peanut butter and also sort of moderate amount of protein, I will need to deal with the glucose that comes off the back of that. So back home now, which is where the real work starts and the fun is to be had, of course. So looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. Probably get out with the dog now and see if I can tire the kids out for a little bit. And yeah, I'll keep an eye on my glucose readings and see what's going on later on. Cheers.
Where's the squirrels? Where's the squirrels? Should we go find them? Come on then, let's go.
Whenever I usually speak to people around my my low carb approach, I'm so aware that diabetes is not a one size fits all thing, and my approach, whilst it's working for me right now, I don't know if it'll work for me in 10 years time, in 5 years time. But the rationale behind it is that the less carbohydrate I ate, the less insulin I would need, and the less insulin I have in my system, the less peaks and troughs I was getting. So those hypos regularly throughout the day, followed by hypers from over treating. I was getting less of those, which for me was worth kind of giving up some of the luxuries, I guess, in life. And this is where diet, it's such an important thing for each individual. I think the benefits outweigh the losses for me as things stand. That's not to say that they always will. But without the Libre system, I wouldn't have had the confidence to try something new. Always in the back of my mind that if it didn't work, then I can just revert back to what I was doing previously. Evening all, that is the kids finally down. Had a nice dinner. We had a roast chicken together, which was really cool. I had that with plenty of veg, and my pudding this evening, I had some Greek yogurt, nuts, and some blueberries on the top, which was tasty as well. I took a couple of units of my fast acting just to make sure I didn't have any spikes off the back of that. And my glucose levels have been tracking really nicely since then. That's me there, so you can see sort of no impact really of my meal. Nice straight trend arrows. I just wanted to show you a quick example of how it doesn't always go right with low carb or with diabetes in general. This was me on a game day a few weeks back. I don't know if you can see that properly. There you go, you can see that a bit better now. So as you can see, leading into the game, really good night's sleep, and then the kickoff at 3 o'clock, you can just see I'll go through the roof. Now this is very common with me during rugby matches. Just got to keep this moving, otherwise it will switch off. And it's just one of those things with diabetes. Everybody gets curveballs, and there's, you just have to do the best with the situation as you can. For me, I take some insulin during the game and at half time, and then try my best to deal with that huge drop off that I get post match with some carbs, basically, just to stop it from plummeting too much. But yeah, just wanted to show that it's not always plain sailing for me either. It's now coming up 10:30 and definitely way past my bedtime. Got a busy training day tomorrow, so my glucose management today has been has been really good. I think it's probably it would be quite boring to watch back, to be honest, but that for me is a sign of a good day. I've not had any issues. I hope that you've enjoyed watching how I manage my diabetes. I hope that some of you might take something from it. And yeah, I need to get as much sleep in as possible, because no doubt we'll be seeing the kids very shortly. So take care, and hopefully see you guys again soon.
Well, if that doesn't motivate you to get the step count up, then I just don't know what will. Our two experts have been watching that as well, so let's get them to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Richard Bracken.
Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Bracken. I'm an exercise physiologist at Swansea University School of Sport and Exercise Sciences. I have a research passion for exploring the nutrient and insulin responses around exercise in people with type 1 diabetes. So I'm very passionate about this exercise to explore the interaction of those very key and important areas.
Lovely. Richard, thank you. And Mark Green.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Green, a diabetes specialist dietitian working with the inpatient diabetes service at Southampton General Hospital. I'm also the author of a free blog called Diabetes Diet Guy, and also have a special interest in exercise and type 1 diabetes, working with patients from all walks of life to help them improve their glucose control.
Lovely. Look, it is really great to have you both with us today. Let's start with someone at the top of their game. Should we, looking back at Chris and his phenomenal routine, puts us all to shame to an extent. Can you explain the principles a little bit behind Chris's very strict diet and exercise regime? Richard?
Yeah, well, I guess when you're so micromanaged as an elite athlete, you have to pay attention to not only all of the ingredients around training and rest and recovery, but with type 1 diabetes, you also have to pay close attention to the swings up and down in blood glucose levels. And I think from some of the key concepts that Chris was talking about in the video, one of the key things was when he was exercising. So he was performing some of his high intensity exercises in the morning time. He was carrying out later activities in the evening, and they have very different responses in the body depending on your background hormonal level. I also noted that he was very interested in high intensity elements and activities, and they can have a very different effect than maybe something like aerobic exercises in the direction and travel of blood glucose. So he's learned and managed a strategy for different types of exercise that he engages in with insulin and with his foodstuffs that allow him to keep that level very straight line all the way throughout the day. So that's an excellent example, I think, of treating your diabetes professionally.
Yeah, it was a very, very flat line, wasn't it? I was feeling quite jealous of that. But in terms of what he does, though, Mark, I mean, clearly we're not professional athletes, the vast majority of us. So what can we take away from his routine and translate into our everyday life?
Well, I think it shows you that actually different approaches can work. Essentially, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I know that some patients, when they're seeing diabetes specialist teams or healthcare practitioners, they might get a little bit of pushback when they suggest low carbohydrate approaches. But actually, I think what Chris has demonstrated, that if actually you're paying a lot of attention to it, you can get great results by following those kind of approaches. And it just also highlights for me the 30 or 40 different decisions that most people without diabetes take for granted that people with type 1 actually really have to make decisions about, and how difficult it is for people with type 1 to manage their day.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal, though, isn't it? I mean, you look at his diet. I have to say, I don't think I could survive on a diet that was that low carb. But as he pointed out, each to their own. Look, loads of you have sent questions in. Thank you for that. So let's run through some of them with our two experts. Start off with exercise and glucose levels. And someone's asking, why do my glucose levels drop during exercise and rise up afterwards? And indeed, as we saw from Chris, Richard, sometimes they go up during exercise as well.
Yeah, this is this reveals, I think, the complexity of exercise. And many people are scared off from exercise as being a bit of a black box, not really understanding how sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But I guess my way of approaching and understanding to the patient of what exercise is to break it up into two components. One is the intensity of the exercise, and one is the duration that you're intending to carry out the activity for. So, for example, the question that you're raising was, why does my glucose level seem to go down in the exercise and then bounce back in the post-exercise period? Well, blood glucose can go down with low intensity or moderate intensity activities during an activity, because the rate of glucose uptake into the working muscle is greater than its appearance from the digestive system, or indeed from the release from the liver, which has a small store of glucose as well. And so wherever you start, when you engage in a moderate intensity activity, there is a potential for it to go downwards. And that's because that glucose has been taken into muscle for fuel to help power the exercise. The other factor, I think, which is really quite important and specific for people with type 1 diabetes, is the amount of background insulin that's circulating in the bloodstream. This is a phrase or a term called hyperinsulemia. And if insulin levels are too high, combined with the muscle action, the rate of uptake can be very, very fast into working tissue. And that can lead to dramatic falls in blood glucose level. If I take the question about why does some activities like high intensity activity raise blood glucose levels, the same organs are involved, only in this case, the liver tends to release a lot more glucose in high intensity activities because of the background circulating hormones that Chris mentioned, like adrenaline, cortisol, glucagon, or other hormones as well. They release quite a lot of new glucose into the circulation at a rate greater than the uptake into the muscle. So therefore, you see a rise in blood glucose level as well. And the final point I wanted to mention is that ultimately, even before exercise begins, as Chris pointed out, a feeling of stress or nervousness releases adrenaline into the circulation and has that effect on the liver to release glucose into the circulation.
Yeah, it's interesting then, isn't it? That it's not just about having rules for when we exercise, it's about rules for what type of exercise we're doing, because we'll react differently. And look, another question mark that's coming, which actually is really fascinating for me, is about what to do before you do any exercise. If your bloods are high, a little bit high, or maybe even quite high, do you have a correction dose before you start training or afterwards?
Yeah, and I know that can be quite a difficult thing for patients to manage. And I think the short answer is you can do both. You can take a correction dose beforehand, although I probably recommend that you take probably around 50% off what you would usually give, maybe a bit more. You'll have to learn your own individual patterns to know exactly how much to shave off, and that'll take some time. But then also appreciate that then you will have active insulin on board during the session, and therefore you might need to use some carbohydrate fueling strategies throughout the session to help stop hypos. And usually would recommend anywhere between 20 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour to stop that happening. Now, I also understand that a lot of the reasons people exercise is because they're trying to lose weight, so they can be reluctant to take extra calories and carbohydrates on board during the exercise, in which case it might be that if the high glucose level isn't causing them any problems, that they can just rely on the exercise to help naturally drop the high glucose level over the course of the session. And if they are still running high at the next by the next meal, then absolutely take your correction then, because it hasn't caused a problem. And to be honest, if I was doing it and it wasn't causing me a problem, that's probably the safest approach and probably the approach that I would take.
Right, that's very interesting. Very interesting. So whether on a personal level we want to, run our levels very flat, or whether we are concerned about that carbohydrate intake in all of that. Look, sticking with you, Mark, someone has messaged in, and again, it's a really interesting point because you talk about us all having our different routines and our different ways of managing all of this. Does it change the fitter we get? The more we do an exercise, do our bodies react differently to the insulin on board?
Yes, and actually I'd be quite keen to hear Richard's thoughts on this because obviously he's the professor of physiology. But yes, we know that even a single bout of exercise can improve your insulin sensitivity. So essentially the insulin's working better in your body. And the fitter you get, the more insulin sensitive you become. And actually this insulin sensitivity, and on the flip side of that, an insulin resistance, where the insulin's not working as well in the body, is usually associated with type 2 diabetes. But that's kind of ignored when people have type 1 because they think of them as almost two distinct things. But actually, you can still be insulin resistant even though you have type 1 diabetes. So as you become fitter, you will find that you will likely need less insulin for the same food and for the same and have a different response to the exercise that you previously had. I guess the other thing just to mention is as you get fitter, what was previously considered high intensity exercise, which we know can initially push up your glucose levels, followed by a decline later, might no longer be a high intensity session for you because your body is more able to deal with it. And therefore you might expect to see more of the cardio effect, where you actually just get a steady decline in your glucose levels over time.
Oh, it sounds complicated. Richard has thrown the gauntlet down for you.
Yeah, well, a fantastic response there. I think all I would add is that obviously with regular training, you pick a person who's starting from a couch to 5 kilometer jog or walk program, or they're going from 5 to 10 kilometers or 10 kilometers to half marathon or beyond. You do rapidly adapt in a physiological sense over a number of weeks. And that tends to change the amount of insulin that you need to inject or take on board with pumps. So I would add to Mark's response by saying you do need to be quite malleable and dynamic with the monitoring the amount of insulin that you actually need to maintain good glycemia, not just within a bout of exercise, but certainly into the long-standing period behind the exercise and into the nighttime period. And even in people who are very well trained, we've noted from our research that you can reduce your rapid-acting insulin by 25 to 30%. And also, your basal amounts tend to go down with extended exercise as well. So I think certainly in the context of understanding how you move on a continuum from being less insulin resistant to more insulin sensitive, just pay attention to the absolute amount of insulin you're taking, and that might need to come down.
Can I just ask you, Richard, how much professional guidance should we take on this? Because if you're talking about reducing basal, for example, by up to 30%, can we just do that, or should we be talking to our specialist first?
I would certainly try to create this idea of a multidisciplinary team input where you feed back and forward from the diabetes clinics and encourage them with your data, ever more easy than before with downloadable data these days, to show them where the problem areas are and discuss the potential for options, and to manage or interact with suitable professionals who have worked with people with diabetes before. So I do think there's a multidisciplinary approach works best for eking out the solutions.
Mark, when it comes to exercise and diet, is there an ideal diet that we should be following? I mean, clearly Chris was very, very low carb. I mean, even I was wondering how he manages to produce the energy that he needs. So is there a specific sort of thing we should be following?
Well, conventionally, you're sort of talking about high level performance, you would expect the athletes to be having a fair amount of carbohydrates in the diet. But actually, Chris has that obvious extra consideration that most people don't have. So I'm not sure if there's particularly an ideal diet, so to speak. I think it's more to do with the nutrition, the quality, and actually what works for you and how you're feeling with that. And if you're looking at high level performance, then obviously, how is your performance? And if you're just more of a recreational exercise, then are you getting the results that you're happy with? And as I said previously, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
I'm a big cat lover, Mark. I don't like that turn of phrase. My cat's outside the door listening. He's very upset. Look, we've talked quite a lot about HIIT classes, the high intensity interval training, which sound absolutely awful to me. I can't think of anything worse. Though I know a lot of people love them. Someone's messaged in and said they do a lot of that and they find it inevitably increases their appetite. So they're asking, how do you manage to consume sufficient carbs to train without sending your glucose levels through the roof? Who wants to go with that one first of all, Richard?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that seems an easy question to ask, but actually is a complex answer, right? Because it involves appetite, the perception of hunger versus what your blood glucose levels are actually doing. With high intensity exercise, as we mentioned earlier, I think the perception generally is that glucose levels either stay the same or rise. But certainly, if they do decline, it tends to be declining less than something like aerobic exercise. So your amount of carbohydrates that you may need to maintain blood glucose levels are actually likely to be less than something like aerobic exercise. What I would say is, the person who submitted the question is asking a very pertinent question when it comes to the magnitude of the rise in blood glucose levels. And if they're going very, very high, then I think you need to try and look at maybe why that might be. Sometimes if you consume carbohydrates prior to a HIIT class, that's going to raise blood glucose levels. Those two factors combined can really elevate blood glucose levels even more. Also, if you're carrying out exercise in the morning, we come out of the nighttime with a sense of temporary insulin resistance called the dawn phenomenon. And so the glucose levels that enter into our circulation tend to stay in our circulation and not go into the muscles as easily. And therefore, there is a big rise in blood glucose levels from the liver, and it raises glucose levels even more. So you have a morning exercise, carbohydrate intake, reduced insulin amount, and high intensity exercise, all combining to really push glucose levels up.
What strikes me, Mark, with this is that we all need a real level of education and understanding here, don't we, as to how all of these things work, because it's going to be so different for everyone and so different when people are starting an exercise regime that we really have to just try it out, don't we? The whole thing is a trial process.
Yeah, and this is something I say to patients quite regularly, actually, is try not to stress yourselves too much because there are a lot of variables that feed into this. And as Richard rightly pointed out, you will have the actual effect of the exercise and the different types of exercise that you're doing. Then also, how will that affect your carbohydrate and correction ratios? What's your background insulin doing? And also, what type of background insulin are you taking? And that's just talking about patients that might be on subcutaneous injections. And by that, I mean, if you're on an ultra long lasting background insulin like a Tresiba or a Toujeo, you can only really adjust those every 3 days. Whereas if you're something on a bit more of a shorter duration insulin like a Levemir or a Lantus, you've got a bit more flexibility to adjust that if you wanted to. Chances are you won't need to if you're just recreationally exercising. But you do have more flexibility there. If you're a pump user, you have much more flexibility because obviously you can do your temp basal rates and you can adjust how you deliver your rapid insulin based on what's happening. But already there, I've said probably 10 different variables, and that's just scratching the surface, really. So I do sympathize with people. And I think it's really just taking it slow and sort of easing yourself into it.
Yeah, there's a real sense here, I think, that people, if you're getting it wrong, or in the sense that your bloods are not flat, don't kick yourself over it. It's going to take quite a while to get into the right routine here. And I suppose, guys, that works with all sorts of exercise. We've talked a lot about, the high intensity stuff, the rugby, the football, all these sort of, proper training, if you like. What about those of us like me whose idea of exercise is something a little bit more leisurely, a 5 or 6 mile walk or something of that nature? How do we can't forget about that. We can't dismiss that as exercise, can we? It still needs to be considered in all of this, Richard.
Sure, and I would say, there are no specific exercise guidelines just for people with type 1 diabetes. What the approach is that we try to get individuals with type 1 diabetes to at least perform what the chief medical officer's guidelines are for regular physical activity. And that comprises, in the latest version of those activities, more movement, to counter sedentariness, much more than just engaging in, for instance, high intensity activities. So what is movement? Movement is just being more engaged physically in your daily lifestyle. And that can involve things like gardening, more housework, or more movement around the house. And even, as you suggested, Stephen, walking, which is certainly an aerobic activity. It can be done at a range of paces. It's probably our biggest global weapon against sedentariness. And I don't know of any healthcare organization that doesn't promote at least activities that try to encourage more movement, and easily done with a pair of walking shoes, that has benefits. And it has benefits very much in line with individuals who have type 1 diabetes on much wider factors than just glucose control, on blood lipids, on cardiovascular fitness, and a range of other opportunities around mental health that can be gained from just being more physically active.
Yeah, and it's something which is quite nice to do. I've found during the lockdown that even just little things like saying, I'm going to walk to the shop rather than jump in the car, and you're adding a couple of miles onto what you're doing a day is a really sort of easy way of easing yourself into exercise. What about Pilates and yoga and all that sort of stuff, Mark? Because a lot of people do it. A lot of people who do it seem very fit as well, I have to say. So where does that fall in on the scale of things?
Well, as Richard alluded to, it can depend, because I've done yoga classes in the past, and I could tell you that it was hard work. But then on the flip side, I've done other classes that have barely touched the sides. So for me, they would probably fall into the aerobic side of things, which is more your cardiovascular system. So you probably more expect that gradual decline in your levels rather than sharp spikes. But if it is quite stressful for you and you're finding it very hard, then absolutely you could get the other effect. So I think really the take-home message for me is understanding your own levels and testing your glucose levels frequently to establish the patterns that happen for you. Because we tend to be creatures of habit, so we tend to repeat similar sort of classes and types of exercise. And once you start to get to patterns, you can then start to put the approaches in place to manage it. And this is where things like the flash glucose monitors and continuous glucose monitors are worth their weight in gold, because you can really see what's happening minute to minute, as opposed to the old finger prick test, which might not be as practical to see what's happening at the time mid-exercise class.
Yeah, it does give you a lot more information as well, doesn't it, for your next session, when you can see exactly what's happened during the last one. It is really useful. And look, you mentioned about people exercising to lose weight, Mark, a little bit earlier on, which I think is, come on, that's got to be one of the most common reasons for doing it. Someone's messaged in, they've had type 1 diabetes for 60 years. Well done on pulling through on all of that. That is quite something. They regularly train 5 times a week, they say, but they're struggling to lose weight. So what advice, Mark, could you have for them?
Well, first of all, congratulations. That's good going. Well, it's very hard to give general advice to very specific questions like that, because there's lots of variables here that we don't know about. So they're training quite regularly, but struggling to lose weight. But what's the diet looking like? What their portion size is like? Are they drinking any alcohol or liquid calories? When they say they're exercising regularly, what's that session actually look like? Is it sufficient enough to burn up the calories to compensate for what they're eating? So I think, just as a general advice, and excuse it if it's a bit of a cop out, is don't take it personally if the weight's not moving. Take it as feedback. So then you can adapt and reapply different approaches to see if it helps. So it might be maybe changing things in the diet, perhaps embracing more lower calorie options like vegetables and salads and lean proteins, or changing what you're doing exercise wise, because for all we know, their definition of exercise could be a 10-minute walk or it could be a 10-mile run, and we just don't know. So it might be a case of doing more intense exercise, although granted, if they've had diabetes 60 years, I'm suspecting they might not necessarily be getting out for the marathons anymore, but they might very well be. So it's really just sort of thinking about the variables that they have to play with from exercise, which is intensity and duration, and maybe manipulating those two variables to see if they can get a different response from the weight loss perspective.
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, it's interesting because obviously, as you say, 60 years with type 1, so it is a person of 60 plus years in age. And when it comes to exercise, often we think about the younger end of the market and about the fitter end of the market. Richard, someone's messaged in about advice for those with mobility restrictions, which of course could be someone of any age.
Absolutely. I think we're in an era where we're encouraging people at a population level to become more physically active. And that applies to people with type 1 diabetes, but maybe because of their condition or another condition that might prevent access to some of the forms of exercise that we typically tend to talk about. However, what I would say is that, for example, if people are finding it very difficult to walk for long periods on their feet, there are body weight supported alternatives to engaging in different exercise patterns like aerobic exercise or resistance exercise that that person can engage in. So what I would say is there is a way, and by connecting with exercise professionals in local gyms or at local exercise classes, they'll be able to recommend options that are circumventing the potential for mobility restriction that you may have. And it's very difficult to give generic advice, but I think if you're focused on how do I activate my cardiorespiratory system with aerobic exercise, or how do I activate my skeletal muscles and work them, I think there's always a solution to be had there somewhere.
Well, look, which leads us very nicely on to top tips because we're very nearly out of time. But I want from both of you, if you would, top tips for motivation when it comes to not only doing some exercise or the right sort of exercise, but also when it comes to the diet as well and trying to eat the right things, which is, it's hard. It's hard for all of us. We all have those moments of temptation, don't we? So when it comes to the right sort, getting motivated to be healthy with our food and with our exercise, how do people really get that motivation going? Mark?
Well, I think first and foremost, don't be too hard on yourself. Just try and aim for a good average to get started. I think a lot of patients I see sort of fall into this all or nothing mentality, and any slip then discourages them and they tend to fall off the wagon entirely. So just aim for a good average, which then allows for the minor slips or the odd bit of cake at work or the odd night out. And that's absolutely fine because it's within a wider healthy eating pattern then. In terms of motivation specifically, I think motivation's actually like a muscle in a way that if you don't train it, you'll lose it. So actually trying to find why it is that you want to get healthier or achieve a certain goal is step one. And then re-engage with that regularly and find things that actually motivate you almost on a daily basis that then push you towards that. And it might be that you have some social support, and it could be a friend or a family member that has either a similar goal, or actually it could be a completely different goal, but you're actually just helping each other through your respective goals, which can push you on to help you get to where you want to be. And as you get more consistent with it, and hopefully don't be too hard on yourself, you'll start to see some progress, which in itself can become a motivator.
And Richard, what are your top tips?
Well, I'd echo a lot of those sentiments. I think initially we talked about the construction of exercise being into an exercise intensity or duration. But if you put the two of those factors together, you come up with an exercise volume. And so my support for people to be just a little bit more active than they currently are is where it needs to go, not on berating yourself for just doing what you perceive to be not enough. And many people will take a long while to get to an amount of exercise advocated by the chief medical officer. But nonetheless, if you know that you did 5 minutes of exercise yesterday, you did 6 minutes the next day, that's progress and that's moving in the right direction. And it certainly allows for an encouragement of a routine, which Mark said as well is important to try to build into your daily lives. One of the first things that always seems to slip from people's lifestyles when they become pressured with other activities, maybe they have caring responsibilities, or maybe they're just generally pressured in a high stressful work environment, is physical activity. And yet it's probably one of the biggest things we should be doing on a daily basis with all of the diversity of the types of exercise available to us. So I'd certainly recommend starting small. I'd certainly recommend doing it regularly, and that can be achieved very much by doing it more socially. If you're techie orientated, there's great online portals these days for sharing your exercise sessions as a community to like-minded individuals. But if you're not, your friends or family would certainly be also there to encourage you to keep on going or even partake with you.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that's something to look forward to as well, isn't it? When all this lockdown stuff ends and the weather gets a little bit better, actually enjoying that time with family and friends and doing a bit of exercise together. Look, we are out of time, I'm sad to say, but thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mark, for sharing your expertise and for answering so many questions today. Also, thanks to Chris Pennell for that insight into the life of a professional athlete living with type 1. Most of all, though, thank you for watching. Diet and exercise is a topic that always raises an awful lot of questions, so we hope we've been able to answer some of them for you and that you've been inspired perhaps to take something away and make a change, no matter how small, that could improve your diet, your fitness, or both. Because in the end, our physical well-being with diabetes is such a huge factor in our emotional life, so even the smallest changes can have a really big impact. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.